Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. If you are new to this podcast, make sure you follow, like, subscribe, and share. Let's jump right in. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Her Version. I have an amazing guest speaker with us today, Emily. Emily is a warrior who is here to talk about her loss, her community, and her ability to keep getting up. We are talking about how the loss of a child can change the trajectory of your entire life, how to get up and find yourself again. Welcome, Emily.
Thanks, Sabrina.
How are you? Here. Oh, thank you for taking some time out of your day to sit down with me. I appreciate you for doing that, and especially on such a subject. So thank you.
Yeah.
How has your week been?
It's been a good week. I live in Montana, and it's been really hot and smoky, but otherwise a great week. And we had our support group meeting this week, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but it's been good so far.
Awesome. So the smoke is from?
Just all the forest fires in the West. Mm-hmm.
Insane.
Yeah.
Does it ever clear? Are there ever like clear days, or it's just a constant?
The end of August, we had some rain and cooler weather that came through and cleared it out. So there was about a week and a half where you could see blue sky. And now it's like apocalyptic. It's like a yellow color out, and the sun is kind of dull. And well, the sun itself, when it sets and rises, is like a bright pink color because of all the smoke, just all the smoke in the air.
So, wow.
Yeah.
So interesting. Does it smell? Can you actually smell like the...
Yeah, the air quality today, I think, is orange, which is unhealthy for most groups. Yeah, so and you can smell the smoke in the air.
Crazy. I feel like that's a little bit of ways, and it's still, I can't even imagine what it must be like living closer to that. Unimaginable.
It's continuing to get worse every year, but...
How long has this fire been going on? I feel like it's been going on for a long time.
I mean, the whole West has had, Montana has had fires all over the state, but it's the whole Northwest and really up and down the coast, California and Southwest have had fires since June. So we've had smoke since June, which is very unprecedented for us.
Yeah. So. No kidding. Well, I'm glad that you are here. I'm glad that you are healthy and spending some time with us today. So I kind of want to talk about, well, first of all, I want to talk about this group that you were just kind of mentioning. I think that would be a nice segue into, the topic that we're talking about. Yeah. So if you don't mind kind of telling us what that is and how you came about with that.
Yeah, so in 2016, we lost our first child. And while I was in the hospital giving birth to him, the hospital staff was really wonderful at sending in mental health professionals just to check on me and my family pretty consistently throughout our stay. And something they kept offering was a support group. We were in a different town, however. So we live in Helena, Montana, and I was giving birth to our son in Missoula, which is an hour and a half-ish away. So it wasn't a support group that I could really access once I left the hospital and, came back home. So when I got back to Helena, I desperately started seeking a support group. And I looked around pretty diligently And there was no child loss support group. There were a lot of support groups that generally looked at grief and loss, but I really wanted to talk with other parents that had lost a child. I wanted to like actually sit in that space with people.
Wow.
So I got introduced to another woman who had lost her son as well about a month before we lost our son. Different circumstances, but we had both lost we both lost children. And we just decided, let's start a support group and run it together, a peer-led support group. We found a place in town, a yoga studio that was willing to let us use their space for free. And we started a Facebook group, or Facebook business page, I guess, and just put it out there. And the first group we had 10 or 11 people. This was in 2017, March of 2017 was when we started it. We had 10 or 11 people come, and it was the whole spectrum. We had a woman in her 70s who had just walked through the death of her 50-year-old daughter. We had people that had lost children 10, 12, 15 years ago. We had people that had recently lost children, and all the forms of loss, like all the circumstances, were different. But was very striking, even from that first gathering, was that grief itself from losing a child was all pretty similar after the fact of losing them, and the circumstances of loss didn't really matter in regard to the fact that grief was still there, and it was still hard to live your life without your child and all of those pieces. So we meet monthly, and during COVID, for a good portion of the time, we were meeting virtually instead of in person, but we are back to in person currently. And it is such a sacred space for a really terrible reason to be together. But it's a community. I mean, obviously it's a community of support, but we have all become really close because when you have an experience like this, you can't help but really share the most raw parts of yourself and your stories.
Of course, of course. Are you the type of person that would normally do that, like form a group? Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Wow. So it was almost put in your path on purpose. When they
I mean, it felt natural for me to just be like, oh, well, there's not a group. Well, of course, I'm just going to start one.
Wow.
That was a really natural thing. And so it just really, I mean, it took off really well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I don't, know where you are in your healing process, but when they say, life happens for you, not to you, I feel like that is very much something to look at with your circumstance, because, here you are providing a platform for so many other people that didn't have that same drive to create, what you've created for them. So that's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I definitely, one phrase, so what you just said made me think of this one phrase that was really difficult for me and continues to be, and something we talk about a lot in support group, is a lot of times when you have loss of any kind, but especially a child, people will say things like everything happens for a reason, or God has a plan, which are kind of like nails on a chalkboard to me. And I've really done a lot of intentional work around what does that mean, and what is, if there is a God, why would you purposefully lose a child? And from my perspective, and what I like to share with people now, is I don't believe that these things happen for a reason. I think that there can be purpose found after the fact. So for me, losing our son was not something that, in my perspective, God planned for us. It was a part of development and our human experience. And for me, it's more about the fact that I have been able to take great pain and loss and turn it into something that allows me to connect with people so that they know they aren't alone. And it's also been something that's helped me survive through the process itself of loss. I mean, it is kind of selfish, part of it was for me. I mean, the main reason was for me. And then to know that so many people have benefited has been just a huge gift, and continues to be, because pretty frequently we have new mothers or fathers coming to support group, and we have a safe space for them.
100%. Would you mind sharing your story?
Yeah. So, and every time I talk about our loss, I get really cold. So just like prepared and ready, just part of the physiological like trauma response. So my husband and I had been married for a little over a year. Neither of us were sure we wanted children. I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. So I had been told from the time I was pretty young that I would probably struggle to get pregnant or have children at all. And I was never the woman that thought, I want to be a mom one day. I wasn't against it, but it just was not, some women know. And I thought, well, if we have children, great. And if we don't, that's okay. I'll still have a full and beautiful life. Mm-hmm. So shortly after getting married, we decided to try. We were kind of the mentality, we'll give it a try. If we get pregnant, cool. And if we don't, then that's cool too. And I just thought it would not work because of years of being told that having PCOS meant I wouldn't be able to get pregnant. Mm-hmm. We got pregnant pretty quickly. So in the summer of 2016, we had just we just bought our first house, and we'd been living there for a week, and I found out I was pregnant. And we were both super excited, but also like in shell shock, like, oh, that happened really quickly. Okay, here we go. So the pregnancy was pretty normal. I told a few people, but the common misconceptions are once you hit 12 weeks, everything is fine. And that's when you should tell everyone. So around 12 weeks, which I actually got the Facebook reminder on Tuesday. So 5 years ago on September 7th, I announced on Facebook that we were pregnant with our first child. And from there, it was, everything was pretty normal. We had an ultrasound at 8 weeks, and they told one of the pictures, our baby looked like a little elephant. So I started joking that I was pregnant with an elephant. And so now we have elephants all over. I wear elephants elephants are kind of our thing now. I had one weird incident around 16 weeks, but I did not go to the hospital for it. My midwife just kind of talked me through it on the phone. And there's a lot of wondering now, if I had gone to the hospital and I'd had an ultrasound, if we would have, known what was going wrong, but there's no way to know at this point. So at 21 weeks, we went in for our anatomy scan. We were not going to find out what we were having. We wanted it to be a surprise. So we went in, and I'd never had an ultrasound before. So it just seemed normal that they were taking a lot of pictures, and it seemed to go really long. And the ultrasound technician, she was in a fine mood. It just seemed normal. And then at one point she said, your baby is very active. I'm going to go get another tech to help me get a few pictures that I can't seem to get on my own, which seemed normal. So they took some more pictures and gave us our pictures. And this was on November 9th of 2016. And so we left, and I went home and took a nap. And when I woke up, I had a voicemail from my midwife. So I tried to call her back and missed her. And she finally got in touch with me around 2-ish in the afternoon. And this is like the moment where, for me, it's like the delineation of where my life changed, where like the end of who I once was and the beginning of like who I am now, I guess. I was sitting in our kitchen. I was standing actually, and the afternoon, like fall sun was coming in through the window, and it was really like a beautiful day. And I was on the phone with her, and she said, are you sitting down? And I sat down, and I just knew as soon as she said that I was about to get bad news. So she started reading off a list of all the malformations that our child had. And there were so many that I could not keep up. I have a professional background in sports medicine, so some of the things she was saying like made sense to me, but then there were some words like umcephaly that I was like, can you send this to me? Can you like send me an email? I don't know how to spell some of this stuff. I've never heard of some of these things. Like, I'm very overwhelmed. There were 8 things on the list that had not formed correctly. And she canceled all of our appointments. And I was like, are you sure? And she said, Emily, I have no idea what this is. I have to send you to a specialist. I've never seen this many malformations in one ultrasound scan. I have no idea. You have to see a specialist. So that was on a Wednesday. We drove over to Missoula, which again is about an hour and a half away, because that's where the fetal maternal medicine specialist is, or the maternal fetal medicine, the specialist. And we were there for about 3.5 hours. They did more ultrasounds and then sat us down and said, your child either has trisomy 13, which is a chromosomal it's chromosomal, like trisomy 23 or trisomy 21 is Down syndrome. Trisomy 13 is also a malformation, in the genetic code, but it is fatal. Trisomy 13 is. So your baby either has trisomy 13 or limb body wall complex. So at this point, when I normally tell our story, I really like to encourage people not to look up limb body wall complex, because all the pictures on the internet are very gruesome. Wow. So I, like when he said limb body wall complex, he said it kind of fast, and I was like, I like literally have no idea what just came out of your mouth. What did you just say? So he walked us through what limb body wall complex is, and it's basically a malformation as the body starts to basically close and create a body cavity. And our son's head had closed, and we didn't know at that point that we were having a son. So his head had closed and his chest cavity had closed. So his heart was working, but he had no bladder. All of his remaining internal organs were outside of his body in what's called an umcephaly. His spine had not formed correctly. He had no bladder. And because the abdominal wall defect was so low, he also had no sex organs. He had arms and legs, and he was swallowing. So there was also a lot of extra fluid, and his umbilical cord didn't have enough vessels in it. So there were just lots of complications, but he was alive. So at this point, I was a little over 21 weeks pregnant, and basically they had to do an amniocentesis to rule out whether or not it was limb body wall or trisomy 13. Trisomy 13 would show up in an amnio with a genetic panel, chromosomal panel, and limb body wall is just a diagnosis of exclusion. So we had the amnio, and then we had to wait. So that was on a Friday. I had to wait the whole weekend. And over the weekend, I put a will together for myself, worked with a friend here in town who very quickly got us in and put a will together just in case I died. Because there were lots of, at that point, my health was not in jeopardy, but at any point, anything could have happened. His umcephaly could have ruptured. There were just so many things, and I could have become septic or hemorrhaged internally right away. Wow. So on Tuesday, we got the call that there was nothing wrong genetically. There were no chromosomal abnormalities. So they officially diagnosed him with limb body wall complex. And that's when we also found out it was a boy through the amnio. So then we had to go back to do a few more scans and talk with the doctor about what's next. So we spent hours with our physician and with a visiting physician who is also a fetal medicine specialist, discussing the options. And we finally came to the decision that I was not going to carry him to term. Limb body wall is fatal. It's very rare. There's not much known about it. And even though he was alive, the way that his body had formed would have meant a lot of things would have had to happen as soon as he was born. A lot of surgeries. He probably wouldn't. Most babies with rare conditions like this, you don't carry to term, so they're born premature anyway. They would have had to do a surgery to create a penis and an anus and a bladder. They would have had to put all of his organs back in his body. But the main thing for us was that the way his spine had formed, there was 100% certainty from all the doctors that looked at our scans that he would be in pain as soon as he could feel pain. So they weren't, everyone is kind of up in the air about whether babies can feel pain in utero. So we weren't sure if he was in pain yet, but that once he was born, he would be in pain. And we made the decision to induce early. There is a time limit to induce early due to laws. So we had no time to really think about it. We just had to make a decision, because if you wait too long, then there are repercussions for you. So that was on a Tuesday. We checked into the hospital on Friday, and they started the induction. I was 22 weeks and 4 days pregnant when Cohen was born. I was in labor for 30 hours. When he was born, he was stillborn. So he died during labor, which lasted about a half hour. So during like actual delivery was about a half hour, and he did die. He hadn't been dead for very long once he was born. He still had some reflexes. So one of my favorite memories that when they gave him to me and I got to hold him and do skin to skin with him, I put my finger in his hand, and his hand still had reflex enough to grab my finger. So I think a lot of people have no idea what happens when a child dies, as far as like what happens next. And we spent the rest of the evening with him. My parents had flown in from Georgia. My sister flew in from Texas, and my brother flew in from Georgia. And they were all there. My husband's family was not able to come. They wanted to, but they were not able to come. But they were all there with my husband and I. So they got to meet our son, who we named Cohen Daniel Tosoni. It was right after Leonard Cohen died that this all happened. And my husband was like, we should name him Leonard. In like a moment of humor, I was like, we cannot name our dead child Leonard. That is a name you have to grow into. Like, you can't just give a child the name of Leonard. So we decided on Cohen. And Daniel is my father's middle name. So Cohen Daniel Tosoni. And we got to spend the rest of the evening with him, which for some people might sound grotesque, but it was, when that's the only time you will ever get to spend with your child, it doesn't matter that they're dead. So we spent the rest of the evening. He was born at almost 6 p.m. on November 19th, right before Thanksgiving. And they kept him in the NICU overnight so that when we woke up, they brought him back in, and we got to spend the rest of the morning with him. And they did plaster molds of his arms and legs and hands and feet for us. Handprints, footprints. And when you lose a child at the hospital, they send you home with a box. And most of the time it's put together by other mothers or parents that have lost children. And so there's lots of little things in there. There's lots of information about support groups across the country. Locally, there's little hand knit things that you can put your children in, whether it's to bury them or to take pictures. And since they know you're leaving the hospital without a baby, it's just like a physical thing to be able to carry so that you're not leaving empty-handed. They also had, most hospitals, when you lose a child, have a photographer that you can call, and they will come take pictures for free of your child. So we did have that, which was lovely. But of course, there will never be enough pictures. I mean, we all took pictures as well, but that's it. Like, those are the only pictures that, we have of our son. I can't remember if I already said this. So Cohen was 1 pound. He was 10.5 inches long, so he was tiny. My husband is a redhead, and I really wanted redheaded babies. And Cohen, he was still very dark colored because he was so early, so premature, but he had tiny little red eyelashes. And I mean, we don't know what color his eyes were because he was too early, and he never opened his eyes. So we decided to have him cremated, and we got to say our goodbyes to his physical body. And then we left the hospital and drove home. And then we had to celebrate Thanksgiving. It was just like, I mean, my mom and dad and brother and sister stayed at our house and celebrated with, I was in a total fog. I also, I used to work for the state health department and worked with our statewide milk bank for donated breast milk. So I knew that I was going to have a milk supply, and I planned on breastfeeding. So I also pumped for a month, and I donated my breast milk to a local nonprofit, which was really terrible and also very healing for me to know that even though I didn't get to nourish my own child with my breast milk, that I was at least able to offer that as a gift to someone else. And I think it was also helpful for me in my own physical healing. And then began the journey of how in the hell do you move forward in life after such an experience? Kind of everything seemed trivial. If someone would complain about something, I would be like, I literally was in labor for 30 hours and I gave birth to my dead son. So just perspective.
Yeah.
Which I'm not as rigid about that anymore because, in my own grief journey, I realized that's not fair to do to people because, people have hardship and it doesn't have to be the same as mine to be hard. But it was and has continued to be a journey and a process, and there's no linear grief. It's all over the place. You don't know which stage you're in. Maybe you start a new stage and you're like, oh shit, I was in serious anger stage. Whoa. Wow. But you don't really know when you're in it. And then really trying to get to know the new person that you are, because you cannot be the same after an experience like that. So I think that's the basic overview. Our Cohen is in an urn in our bedroom.
Wow.
And this November 19th will be 5 years since he was born.
Wow.
And every year as we get closer, I think, what the hell do we do this year to celebrate his birthday? So starting to think up plans of what do we do to celebrate 5 years?
Wow. I love that name, Cohen.
Yeah.
So cute. I don't think I've ever heard that one before.
Mm.
What you go home,
Mhm.
I can't even imagine. But what's the first thing you do?
I, I don't really remember. I mean, thankfully, my family was around, so they took care of like the house and things for a week. And then one of the things that was most impactful for us, and this is something I always suggest to people when they say, "Oh, somebody I know has lost someone or has lost a child or lost a parent and I don't know what to do." I always say send food, because trying to like prepare food and eat and go to the grocery store and like remember to do the basic things, just like you just don't remember. So one of my very good friends set up a meal train for 3 months.
Wow.
Like every other day, people were dropping food on our doorstep, um, which was huge
Yeah.
because I didn't have the full capacity. I mean, part of it is, you know, you're in shock right away. And so you know what has just happened, but the full weight of it hasn't hit yet. So I was still trying to function normally, like trying to run my business and trying to, for me, I am an avid exerciser and have been for most of my life. So I did continue to go to the gym, um, because I needed, that was like my mental escape. Actually, that also, I felt like there's humor in the things that most people wouldn't find humor in, but this is just how you like survive child loss. So
Yeah, yeah.
about 10 days after he was born, I went to the gym, and I love to do the cycle studio, right? Like stationary biking.
Yeah.
So I went and did about a 10-minute cycle because, I just gave birth, so I'm not going to like go crazy.
Yeah.
And there was an older man in there on a bike near me. And when I got off, he said, "Oh, you're not going to go for any longer?" And I just whipped my head around and said, "I just gave birth 10 days ago." And he was like, oh, okay. Just like little moments like that where I had to really like use my personality to protect myself, because otherwise it just would have been, it could have gone downhill quickly. But the meal part was huge, having people contribute food, so that Joe and I could function. And there's so much to it, right? Like everyone told me that my husband and I would process the grief differently.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, it was pretty similar. We cried a lot together. There were certain like TV shows and movies we couldn't watch anymore because there would be like a mention of a dead child, and I would be like, turn it off. And then I would just go cry for the rest of the night. But eventually the like processing of the grief becomes so different between he and I, and it still is now to this day. So that was like a whole nother thing that had to be processed, was learning how to understand his grief and him understand my grief, and us like still communicate with each other and hold space for how the other one was grieving and continues to grieve. But I mean, the reality was I just needed some normalcy. So I still tried to do as normal as possible, the things that I could. Going out in public became really difficult because I had been, everyone knew I was pregnant,
Yeah.
and not everyone knew that we had lost our son. So I would go in public and people would be like, when are you, and I would just like, cry in the grocery store, just like, cry in the middle of places when I would run into people and they would be like, where'd your belly go? What is, and I'd be like, oh, yeah, Cohen, he was born, he's dead. Yep, thanks. Can I finish grocery shopping now?
Wow.
But the other big thing for me was I started asking for connections to other people, that other women specifically that had lost children. So I was having a lot of grief dates. So I would be like, hey, we have a mutual friend that said you lost a baby. Do you want to go cry together in a coffee shop? So I did a lot of that, of like meeting new friends. And the reality was, I started making new friends with women who had dealt with miscarriage and infertility and child loss and the whole spectrum.
Wow.
And being able to relate and like truly like cry together in public was life-giving for me.
Wow.
And then starting the support group and being able to put energy into that was really helpful. Like put my heartbreak into something that could be positive was super helpful.
I bet. I bet.
Yeah.
What were you able to find in community, which is what you're kind of talking about, that you weren't able to find anywhere else? Sharing stories, how did that help?
So I think when it comes to loss, most people don't know how to support someone.
I don't.
Because which was me too. Like I would say that was 100% me previous to this experience. I mean, I would like reach out to the person shortly after losing whoever they lost, whatever the circumstances were, and it would be on my mind from time to time. But I would always think, they're probably so overwhelmed. I probably shouldn't reach out. They probably have so many people taking care of them. And the reality was, in that first 6 months, some of my best friends didn't even reach out. And some of the people that I thought would reach out, I should say, I just never heard from, or I heard like, right at the beginning and then nothing. And I felt like, doesn't everyone know that I am like dying over here? Doesn't everyone know that like my body thinks I should still be pregnant and I'm still going through the 3rd trimester, and now Cohen's due date has arrived and now I'm going through the 4th trimester. I mean, when I got to my due date, which was in March, in that month, I started having phantom preterm labor, I mean, just all the things you think. You wake up in the night and you feel like there's a baby kicking you, and there's, just all the things, like just there's so much to it. Yeah, I mean, when you lose a child, whether it's early miscarriage or a situation like ours, your body still thinks you're pregnant. So you still go through all the phases of pregnancy and delivery, and like it was insane.
Wow.
And there were so many people that I just didn't hear from. And I didn't have the capacity to reach out and say, I need you to support me.
Yeah.
But then there were so many people that I did hear from, that, not that I didn't expect it, but maybe we weren't as close of friends or connections previously. And then they would reach out every week or every 2 weeks and say, I'm just thinking about you. How are you doing? Do you want me to drop anything off? Can I put anything in the mail to you? So initially it was like just getting a deeper understanding of who understood and who I could connect with without having to do a lot of explaining about the support I needed. And then when I started to meet these other mothers that had also dealt with losing their children, they just got it. They're like, yeah, girl, what do you need? What do you need me to drop at your house? When you call me in the middle of the night,
wow.
Whenever you want to get together, let me know. Right. They just totally understood that I needed to sit down and cry and not have anyone try and fix it. I didn't need anyone to say, it's going to be okay, you can move forward from this. I needed somebody to be like, this fucking sucks. I can't believe you had to go through this, but I will sit here in this really uncomfortable space with you. Because nobody can fix it. And there's nothing anyone can say that makes it better. There's no like, catchphrase or condolences that people try and use to make themselves feel more comfortable that made me feel better.
Yeah.
Other than to just say, this sucks. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to sit here with you. And if there is something you need that I can do, please tell me. And I just found that with this group of women that that I started meeting with through our support group. And that gave me a lot more confidence to be able to say to my friends and my family what I did need in terms of their support. Um, and it's also allowed me to be able, I've been very, very vocal about our loss and grief and what my struggles continue to be and have been through this journey. And I really want people to know that when you have someone who's lost someone, so whether it's a child or someone else, you reaching out to them to say, I was thinking about you. I'm really sorry about, the loss of your child or the loss of your mother or whatever. A lot of times as the person sending that message, we think, oh, if I send them this message, it might make them sad because I'm bringing it up. And what I want people to know is we're thinking about it all the time. Like my son is always on my mind. Like it's never like a moment of I get a text message and I'm like, oh shit, I hadn't thought about that in weeks. Never. Yeah. So it's so refreshing to me when someone remembers Cohen because nobody got to meet him other than my husband and I and my immediate family. So of course, no one's really going to remember him because no one met him, right? And like we didn't get to spend living time with him. So who knows what he was like as a person. But to have people say, I get texts a lot that are like, I saw this beautiful picture of an elephant and I thought of you and I thought of Cohen because again, like elephants is just, that's what we have adopted as our animal to represent Cohen. And we have just animals everywhere, elephants everywhere. I love that kind of stuff. It just makes my heart sing to know that if I had 2 living children, because we did have another child and he is healthy, thriving, upstairs running around like a wild animal. If I had 2 living children, people would remember both of them, but I have one invisible to the world child and one living child. And I'm still a mom of 2. I just don't get to physically parent one of my children. Yeah.
100%. 100%. When we were on the phone talking initially, you were talking about grief, and you kind of mentioned it earlier when we were talking. And the 5 stages, I believe it's the 5 stages of grief.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go into a little more detail as far as how it relates? Because I am enjoying listening to, sounds dumb to say that, but when you were first speaking, and your first group of individuals that met, the dozen or so, and how it didn't matter when the child died, it was all very similar feelings that went into it. And I think from my perspective, I can't speak for anybody else, but from my perspective, it seems like it would be different. Because, and no offense, and I'm not trying to offend all, because a child, when you're spending years with a child, 50 years, like the example that you gave, and having your child die versus initially, you spending a few hours, I would just love to kind of go a little deeper into how that's the same, to be able to give people like me and people listening the correct view on how similar it is.
Yeah. So we have this conversation a lot in support group, and one of our ground rules is no one's allowed to do any comparison. Because a lot of times we'll have people come and they'll hear a story that someone shares about their loss, which includes premature birth and the NICU and, you know, all sorts of stays, a stay here and a stay there and transport and making decisions and just, you know, months and months of turmoil. And then somebody else will say, oh, my loss is not that bad. And we have worked really hard to say that's not necessary, because whether you are 6 weeks pregnant and you have just peed on a stick and you know that you're going to be a mom, you're excited and you immediately start to think about the future you're going to have with that child, what your life is going to look like, how it's going to change. I mean, as soon as you know you're pregnant, everything changes. And I do truly believe that that's the case, whether you thought you were pregnant or you like unknowingly took a test and right, like everything changes.
Yeah.
And you start to envision the future with your child and how you will parent them and what it will be like and all the things. So whether you have, you know, a few weeks of pregnancy where you are having those dreams without being able to feel your child inside of you yet, like feel them kicking, or whether they have been alive for 50 years and you have memories and pictures and experiences, or grandchildren, once they die, it's unnatural. Yeah. They're not supposed to die before us. And all the like dreams of what life would be like and all the experiences we would get to see them have are just gone. And you still parent them in your brain. You still, like, because they're your DNA, because they're a part of you, it's not like you can stop being their parent even though they're not physically here. So then you have lifetime of milestones that you never get to experience. So like for us, our son Miles is 3.5. So he was born 11 months after Cohen's due date. So if they had been born on time, they would, you know, be 11, 12 months apart. 13 months, 13 months apart. So every milestone that Miles has had has been really hard for me. Like so much joy and then also so sad. Like when he took his first steps, it was so exciting. And so sad to know that we should have already experienced that once. And to think about like what the future will be like, sending him to kindergarten eventually, like we would be starting to, you know, think about, oh, Cohen will be going into kindergarten next year. What will that be like? You know, all those things that you don't get to do. So even though they're not here and we didn't have, you know, we never had any living time with Cohen. I mean, I feel fortunate that I at least got like womb time with him. You know, I got to feel him moving and like have that memory. But somebody said to me the other day a phrase that has really stuck in my brain, that basically we are phantom moms, that we're always thinking about our kid and like thinking about what would be, even though they're not here. And shortly after, it had to have been in springtime, because I remember I was walking outside and there was no snow on the ground. So it had to have been springtime after, so probably 4 to 5 months after Cohen was born. And I was on the phone with someone, and I don't remember who it was, but they said, if you're still this sad in 10 years, I'll be worried. And I was furious
Wow.
because all I could think was, in 10 years, my kid is still going to be dead. Why would I not still be this sad?
Wow.
He's still not here.
Yeah.
Like, what an insensitive thing to say.
Yeah.
And what I feel like I've learned about grief from my own journey is that it doesn't end and it doesn't get better. It just changes, and we change. So I know pretty well what my triggers are. I work really hard to make sure that I have things planned for the dates that are meaningful in our journey. Cohen's due date, the day he was born, the day we got the diagnosis, the day I found out I was pregnant. Like, those days come up on the calendar, and I have like a deep physiological reaction. Even if I don't really know, I'll be like, I'm like off. What is wrong? And then I'll look at the calendar and be like, oh, today's the day I found out I was pregnant with Cohen 5 years ago. Of course, today is just like, it's like my body literally knows,
Wow.
even if I'm not like fully aware of what date is on the calendar. So like, in my grief journey, knowing what my triggers are, knowing how to like take care of myself in those times, knowing that on November 19th, I don't ever plan anything except for to spend time with my husband and Miles. And we always do something. We always go hiking. We try to do something outside. We take one of our little elephants with us. I mean, we always do something, right? And I truly feel like it hasn't gotten better. It's just so different now. And there's no moving on from losing a child. It's just, you have to move forward, right? You can't move on. I mean, you can't move on. It's your child and they're not here with you. And it's a part of you. It is a part of you. And you have to feel all of that in order to really be able to continue to live. One of my favorite books is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. And forever, I have loved the section in there on joy and sorrow. And if anyone listening has never read The Prophet, just buy it. You'll be glad you did. Yes. But it is so true. And we actually have upstairs in our living room a framed picture of what the stars looked like in the sky the night that Cohen was born.
Wow.
And then an excerpt from On Joy and Sorrow below it, as a reminder that you can never know full joy, like the full extent and the full capacity of joy, if you have not had like just tremendous sorrow. They are connected. You cannot have one without the other. You can never know the full extent of why you love something or why it brings you so much comfort if you don't know what it's like to be so sad and so heartbroken and so traumatized. And I know that can sound really, there are obviously instances in people's life that is not necessarily applicable to when it comes to trauma and experiences. But in this circumstance for me, I don't know what I would be like as a mother if I'd not lost my first child. I mean, I know what I would be like, but like, I feel like I'm so much more patient than I otherwise would be because I also know what it's like to not be able to bring your child home. When Miles was little, our living son, when he was little and, would wake up in the middle of the night, and it was frustrating, right? I was sleep deprived. But I every time would be like, I'm so grateful you're alive. I'm so grateful that you can cry. I mean, wow. I wish you would go to sleep. I wish you'd sleep through the night. But like, I'm also so grateful that we have you, and that as much as you're like a total wild animal right now as a 3.5-year-old, like, how fortunate that we get to watch him grow up, that we get to watch him age, that we get to be there for all of those milestones. And even though they still continue to make me sad and happy when he hits milestones, I'm so grateful for that. Um, Now that being said, I did start an antidepressant last year, right after Cohen's 4th birthday, because it was the hardest one for me yet. I have no idea why. It was terrible. I finally decided, like, I can't just organically take care of my mental health. I have to. So I am on an antidepressant, and it's been one of the best gifts I've ever given myself. And it doesn't mean that I don't still have sadness, and it doesn't mean that I am muted or that I don't have an emotional capacity, right? I have enough help from medicine that I can function and cope and take care of myself and my family, and also still process the reality of what it's like to live after losing a child.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, how soon or do you talk to somebody like a therapist, or how long, how soon after did you, like, how did that, because some people are nervous about that, they don't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so how'd that work for you?
I mean, I had seen therapists for different things in my life previously, and I was not against seeing a therapist. However, I could not find one here in town that like focused on child loss. And again, I just didn't really want to sit with someone and talk about grief in general. I wanted to talk about, like, my physical body is like a human was in my body and died. Like, I like couldn't just talk about, I needed, which is part of why I started the support group, because I was like, I need to talk to other women who get this. And then at some point I'll look for a therapist. So a few years ago, I did start seeing a therapist who, I'm trying to think of, she specialized in EMDR therapy. So
Oh yeah.
I specifically, I got to the point where I was like, I don't really want to go to talk therapy. This is just for me personally. I knew that I didn't want to go to talk therapy because I talk about it all the time. I wanted to go somewhere where I could, like, retrain my brain. So I started going and doing EMDR to, retrain those channels so that I wasn't so trauma triggered. And then COVID happened. So I've not been back, but even the little bit of work that we did in the few sessions that I had with her was very helpful. And I do plan on going back eventually, because, the reality is Miles is old enough now that he asks a lot of questions about death, and he wants to know, he'll say, when my brother is done being dead, when is he going to come play with me? When my brother is done being dead, when do I get to meet him? And he has seen Cohen's urn. He's held Cohen's bag of ashes. We explained to him, we've shown him pictures, this is your brother. He died, he's too young to understand the concept of death, but I know that I'm going to need some help from a therapist eventually, just to help me work through how to explain to Miles what death is and why his brother died. And just, knowing that this is a continual journey for me, that I will never be done processing all that has happened and how it has changed me and who I am now and how that affects who I become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. As far as, I don't know what the correct verbiage is for this. I originally worded it as, how do you relieve yourself from these feelings? But I don't like the way that I worded that anymore. You're talking about, therapy. You're talking about EMDR. Was there anything else? And your husband, is he joining you in some of this stuff? I know his journey is his journey, but anything that you want to share?
So Joe, he has never come to support group. He supports me in going and running support group. And in the beginning, I had to be, well, I should say about 6 months after Cohen was born, I had to sit him down and say, I know you're processing this differently than me, and you have to be okay with the fact that I'm not okay. And I know you're at a place where, you're still sad and heartbroken, but it's just different for you because you also didn't physically go through the whole process,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, it's just true. And
Yeah.
we worked very diligently on that because the statistics are that it's somewhere around 80% of couples that experience child loss or miscarriage or infertility get divorced because
I'm
there's a
glad you're saying that.
misunderstanding there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty drastic.
Yeah.
So I was very much like, I don't want to get divorced. And I need to make sure you understand that it's okay that we grieve differently. I'm not going to judge the way you grieve. So I need you to afford me that same space. And we talk about Cohen, but I really talk mostly about my deep feelings with my girlfriends and support group, not because I'm trying to keep something from him, but because they just get it. And I do tell him how I'm feeling, but he's usually like, oh, I'm like, okay, I need a little bit more than that. I mean, he's a very supportive, understanding, kind spouse. I mean, he's wonderful, but it's just not the same for him. And that's fine. I think for me, I have always been a big journaler. So I always encourage people when they lose a child to journal everything, like as much as possible, even though it feels terrible to do it, because especially that first year, you're in total shock for a year. And the reality is year 2 is even worse, because by year 2, you're like not in shock anymore. And then you're like, shit, I lost my child. And now it's real. Now we're not just in like the shock phase anymore. Now I have to go through the rest of my life with this reality. So year 2 sucks worse than year 1. And journaling was really cathartic for me because now I can read back and in some ways see how far I've come, but also see like how really, really hard it was, because you are in such shock that it's hard, but it's good to have a reference point. And there are so many memories you won't remember because you're in shock. Your body is just in survival mode. Yeah. So journaling was really helpful for me. Exercise has been like, I mean, I know it's not everybody's thing, but for me, it has always been very healthy is not the word I want to use, but like, it's just my meditation. It's my time. I like feel my best emotionally, mentally, in all the ways when I exercise. So I have continued to be very diligent with that, which is easy for me because I've created a habit out of it. And then making sure I have time to get away, which has been harder because of COVID. But I would always say to my husband, like, I just need to like get away and have like a weekend to myself or a ladies' weekend just to kind of come back to center for myself. And he's very understanding of that. And I just had a ladies' weekend a few weekends ago with my friend who I run the support group with and some of our mutual friends. And those kinds of things really fill my cup because I can talk openly about the shit,
Yeah.
In general, but then also like, how do you process? What are you planning to do for the 5th birthday? How are things going? Are you going to have another kid? How do you feel about that? Right? Like all the things, because it's just a never ending, especially for women of childbearing age, right? I get that question all the time. When are you going to have more kids? Or people will say to me like, Miles needs a sibling. And I'm like, Miles has a brother. He's dead. Do you have any more questions? I mean, I'm not trying to be insensitive to people, but when they say things like that, I'm just honest. And I'm like, oh, he has a brother. Oh, how old is brother? And I'm like, he's dead. So thanks for your input. I hope that didn't come across crass, but it's such a personal question, right? To ask people like, is this your first pregnancy? Maybe it's their 10th pregnancy and they've continued to have struggles. And what a triggering question. I'm not saying that like people should feel bad about that, but just to like think about how we word things, and the things we say to women. You should have more children. Are you going to give that little boy a sibling? What if I just spent $30,000 to have IVF and now we don't have any more money to have another kid, right? Like there's so many ways that we can have conversations with women about their families without using those intrusive questions that can be very triggering. That was kind of a tangent, but
no, I thank you for that, because these are all things that we don't necessarily talk about if we don't have a realm to relate it to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally understand where that's coming from. I was going to ask you something that made you said something, and then I guess I'll figure it out later. Um, how do you decide to show up for your world now?
I have decided that it's important to show up as like the optimist and the like outgoing, happy person that I am, and also show that life can be hard. And I'm very transparent about all of that. That I am an optimist and I do see the best in people and in situations and, you know, all the things. And there are still days that I feel paralyzed with sadness and that I cry without even realizing why. And I'm very open about that. And I've always been someone who it's always been, I've always very easily been a communicator. Like, I'm like, why wouldn't you share your feelings? Well, don't you want me to know how you're feeling? I want you to know how I'm feeling. That's how we can connect with each other. Let's share. But it's become even more important for like survival and for connection now, because I want people to know that I have a very full, happy life. And there's also a big piece missing. And I think it's okay that other people feel that way and that they're honest about it, that you don't have to show up and be like sunshine and rainbows all the time, that it's okay if there's a hole, whatever that might be. And it's okay to share that, whether it's on social media or in person or with the people you love. You know, I think a lot of times culturally, we hold a lot of our negative emotions in and they will just eat you alive. And so important to know how to identify when they're eating you alive, to know how to like listen to your body and seek help or guidance or further connection when needed, and to also celebrate whatever you want and take as many selfies. I am a big proponent of like, take all the damn pictures. Take them, because I look back at the pictures I have of my kid and there's like only a certain amount and then that's it forever. Take all the pictures of all the experiences and all the things and put it all over social media and don't worry at all about what anyone thinks. Who cares? It's your life. These are your memories. It's your, you know, bubble that you want to remember. Don't give that power away. And also take care of yourself. You don't have to take care of other people, right? Like, all of the things I've done are to take care of myself. And in doing so, and in sharing that, people have reached out to me and said, thank you. This has been so helpful for me. And if in taking care of myself in a way that is meaningful can impact others, isn't that what like it's all about? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing?
100%. I remembered my question.
I'm ready.
I know this isn't to compare your story to anybody else's story. So anybody who's watching this now or on the replay, I'm asking you, in your journey, how did it look for you, being okay with being happy? When did that happen? Like, being okay with that?
I don't really know. Yeah, that's a really thoughtful insight that I don't really have a good answer to. Yeah, I think it just kind of, I wouldn't say it happened. I feel like I probably, you know, I worked to cultivate happiness in my life again. I will say I wasn't necessarily excited to get pregnant again. I'm so grateful that we have Miles, but if anyone is listening and is like, I should just be over the moon excited all the time about being pregnant again. And I hated being pregnant. It was terrifying the whole time. I was really
Wow.
grateful to have, a healthy child the second time around, but I hated it because all I could think about was, you could die too. This one could die too. It could just be another thing. I mean, who knows what? I mean, yeah. Um, and even I would say I struggled with postpartum depression, obviously. And then I also struggled with postpartum depression after Miles was born, but it was not severe. So I didn't realize it until later. So even though I was like, I think people thought, would have thought I was happy, and I was, but also like I probably should have been on medication. Um, this past year, almost since I started taking Lexapro, has felt like a weight was lifted off my chest. Now, I should say I'm also I have very high anxiety. I probably could have benefited from medication a long time ago. And I have taken care of my anxiety with exercise and how I eat and lifestyle choices, right? But finally going on an antidepressant was the extra weight that I needed to like finally feel like it's okay to be happy all the time, I guess. It was very freeing, and I didn't realize how overwhelmed I felt until I wasn't overwhelmed like that anymore, if that makes
Wow.
sense.
I can
Yeah.
I can have
Yeah.
empathy towards that. Um, I think of that sometimes. I don't know what your experience is as a mother, but I've talked to a couple women about this thing that happens to me every once in a while where I'll just be going along in my life just normal, and then all of a sudden, just for no reason at all, think of like something really horrible happening to my son.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like a split minute. It's not like I don't have like mental problems or anything, but it just every once in a while, just something will just fly into my head, and for like a full solid 30 seconds, just a whole journey of like, if this happened, then this would happen, and then he would die, and this is what my life would be. And I go through all of these emotions for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things and I've talked about this with other mothers, and other mothers do relate, where they do have sensations like that every once in a while, where something happens, and it's sad for a second. But I think of that sometimes, and I think of mothers who have gone through loss, and the cognitive dissonance that must happen regarding being okay with being happy. And I don't know why it bothers me, but it's like it bothers me to think that there are individuals who are stuck in that. Mothers who are stuck in not being okay. And what a frustrating conundrum that must be,
Mm-hmm.
to not feel like that's something that they can do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice for women that might be going through that? Because that's like a thing.
I think the main way to address that is to take the onus off those of us that have had this kind of experience, and to put it on society as a whole to normalize the fact that people lose children, that women lose children. We have to have more conversations. And we have to, we have to get rid of the like, oh, you had a miscarriage at 6 weeks. Well, at least it was only 6 weeks. We have to stop saying things like that. We have to stop saying things like, ah, well, at least they weren't 5 years old. I mean, at least it was early enough on that they didn't feel any pain, or right. Like, we have to normalize conversations about loss in general, about infertility, about miscarriage, about child loss, about stillbirth. And we have to like have a collective understanding that it is a lifelong grief forever. I mean, I can't tell you how many women. So at the time that, well, I should say shortly after we lost Cohen, I started teaching a water aerobics class. And, most of my class participants were like 60 or older. And when I was pregnant with Miles, I shared with they threw me a surprise baby shower and I cried. I cried because it was, so special, but also I cried because I didn't get to have a baby shower with Cohen. And I told them that, I said, most of you don't know this, but we lost our first child. And I can't tell you how many in the room of these women, 60 and older, were like, oh, I lost 3 children to stillbirth. Oh, I could never have children. Oh, I had however many miscarriages. They knew dates. They knew how old their children would be. Women never forget this stuff.
Wow.
They never forget it. If you know women, anyone knows a woman that's had a miscarriage, they know how old their kid would be. They know.
Wow.
It's in their bones forever. So I think the way to really get to the place where we can say to women, it's okay to not be okay, but also it's okay to like find happiness in other ways in your life, is that we have to normalize the fact that their loss was like that it impacts them forever. We have to know as a society that it is something that will impact women forever. And of course, the other people in their family are impacted, but the actual woman who experiences bleeding, having a miscarriage, and then having to get a D&C because her body didn't have a full miscarriage on her own, a woman like me who gives birth and, I have to hold my dead child and I get to do skin to skin, but there will never be, warmth because he's dead, right? Like, a woman who goes full term and then in the delivery room, her baby dies in the birth canal and she has to give birth to her child at 40 weeks dead, a perfectly formed baby who dies, right? Like, that shit happens every day. Yeah. People are losing children, having miscarriages, struggling with infertility every day. And the only way we can say to women, it's okay that you're not okay. And we want to help you find a spark in your life of happiness in other ways, is normalize the conversations around loss. Because holy shit, as soon as you say to a room, no matter the age, as soon as I'm like, yeah, we have 2 kids, one is dead. He died. He had a rare and fatal syndrome. Everyone's like, oh yeah. Wow. I've had 5 miscarriages. It's insane. I mean, when I walk into a room now and I look around, I actually have a bit of social anxiety now, which I never had before, because when I meet new people, I'm like, oh God, somebody's going to ask me how many kids I have, and it's going to be awkward and they're going to be weird, and I'm just not going to go. But when I walk into a room or I'm at the grocery store or wherever, all I can think about is, I wonder if every woman in here has struggled with fertility or miscarriage. I wonder how many have had a stillbirth. I wonder what their children's names were. I wonder if they named them. I wonder if they gave birth in a place and a time when they just took the baby away and you never saw them, because that's what used to happen. You would have a baby and they would let's just pretend this didn't happen. Let's take the baby. Wow. I can't even imagine. Obviously get really fired up about all of these pieces, so feel free to
that's fine.
stop me. I think this stuff is so important because women are carrying so much anyway for families, and then we are basically asking them to quietly carry their grief, and that's unacceptable.
Wow. Absolutely. This has been wonderful.
Thanks for letting me share. Yeah.
I have a hard time transitioning because it's it seems so callous to go from just one question to the next, um, because there's obviously so much depth
Yeah.
with this. How do you, for my own understanding, how do you have group discussions once a month for like a set amount of time? How do you even do that?
So easy.
Like you could just go on forever.
Yeah.
And I'm just talking to one person. What's the time limit on that? Do you have like, is it just like until you want to go home? How do you do that?
I mean, we say it's 2 hours, but like this past week we were there for 3. Um, I mean, there's always something to talk about. And if we
Yeah.
have somebody new come, then we always basically just open up the floor and say, anyone who wants to, you don't have to share if you don't want to. You can just be here and we hold space with you. But we basically share our stories. So if there's anybody who's new, everyone who's comfortable shares their story about why they're there. And then if we have time, we have like questions and stuff that we can ask, but usually it's more like, okay, we're coming in. Like this time it was like, okay, we're at the anniversary of a lot of deaths, of a lot of like the children that, have died that are, what are you doing for their birthday? How did you handle, just all the things, right? And next support group will be discussing, all right, we're going into the holiday season. How you feeling? How are you
Wow.
preparing? How do you like the holiday season is raw for me because Cohen was born right before Thanksgiving and then we had to celebrate Christmas and New
Wow.
Year's and I was like, fuck these holidays. Like I
Yeah.
should be pregnant, like real excited about doing first Christmas next year. And instead I'm like a vacant tomb with no child. Um,
Wow.
so there's always something there's always something to talk about. Um, And honestly, like we're just such a family. Those of us that are there regularly, and then the new people that come, we like just blend them into our family, our support group family. And we text each other during, like we meet once a month, but we are still like in connection otherwise. And when there are anniversary dates for whatever, we reach out to each other. Although I will say, pretty standard, most lost moms that I know have like trouble remembering other people's dates, but like I can remember all of my dates, which is normal. So I'll be like, oh God, sorry, I forgot the other day, but I remembered. And that is just like normal
Yeah.
because we get it, right? Like your brain changes. I mean, when you have loss and you go through grief like that and depression and everything that comes with it, like the chemistry of your brain changes. I mean, there's so many facets to it, but we usually keep it around 2 hours. And if we need to, we stay longer. And we usually try. So October is basically Child Loss Awareness Month, Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And October 15th is Wave of Light Day. So for that, what that means is that at 7 o'clock local time around the world, you light a candle for an hour as basically in memory of all the children that have died, pregnancy and infant loss. So we didn't do anything last year because of COVID, but the year before we all got together here at my house and we had food. And then at 7 o'clock, we had all brought like our urns and the other things that we have from our children, and we put them on a table, kind of like a Day of the Dead situation, I guess, would be another way to explain it.
Wow.
And we lit candles in memory of our children and cried and shared stories. And that like doing those kinds of things along with when we meet normally for support group is really helpful, just to hold that space with each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
What kind of plans do you have going on for the next few years? Do you have any more plans for your group or
Mm.
family, business? What do you have going on?
I mean, I would love to get to a place where we could have our group meet once a month in person and once a month virtually. Um, at this point, myself and Ashley, who co-facilitates with me, we both have small children. So trying to fit another night a month in, along with everything else in our lives, just hasn't been a reality yet. But I would love that to eventually happen. So that if for any reason people can't be there physically in person, they can still benefit from the connection. I would love to write a book. I have a few book ideas, but I would love to write a book about my experience and because I read quite a few books in that first year that were so helpful to me about child loss.
Mm.
And I think, I would hope that my story could also be helpful to those that I'll never meet, but maybe they would, stumble across my book. So that is, on the list of things to do.
Absolutely.
And as far as like business, I mean, I just want to continue to grow my business and have impact. And part of that is being able to have impact in that having more financial capacity to give to organizations that work with mothers and children and after loss and during loss and all sorts of different capacities. I'm very passionate about and have been since before we lost Cohen. The YWCA here in our town helps women and children that are experiencing homelessness transition into transitional housing and, sustainable life. And I feel even more passionate about that now. Like, how can we support women in whatever struggles they have had, whether it's childhood trauma or addiction or homelessness or whatever, so that they can in turn be a better parent for their children, so that their children can be better parents if they decide, just to like work through that cycle. Because, parenting is hard in and of itself, and then throw in trauma and struggle and loss and depression and all the things. And we're just like, figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Figure it out.
Yep.
Good luck.
Yeah.
So continuing to be able to be present with organizations that do work that support women specifically, and mothers more, in whatever way they need is so important. And the growth of my business means I can do more in that capacity. I mean, I still do, I give and promote those organizations now, but and one thing I would also really love to do that we are hoping to do here in Helena is donate a cuddle cot to the hospital. So a cuddle cot keeps after your child has died, it keeps them from going into rigor mortis. I know that sounds grotesque to people, but like basically keeps them cool so that you can spend as much time as you want with them without them starting to, go through the next process. Yeah.
No kidding.
Which again, I know most people don't think about that, but like when your child dies, I mean, if I had been really in my right mind, I probably would have stayed at the hospital for a few days to spend with Cohen.
Wow.
And if your hospital has a cuddle cot, then that is a feasible option so that you can spend more time with your child. And I'm sure some people listening are like, that's weird. But, if you've never lost a child and you've never had to watch them wheel them out of the room for the last time, knowing that they're either going to be buried or cremated, like you just don't know.
Wow.
Every minute matters.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that before. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on here and watching me cry.
Thanks for watching me cry.
Well,
Equally.
you have a reason to cry. I so appreciate you opening up and sharing your story. Uh, One of the things that I like to do at the end here is speak directly to individuals who are struggling with the topic that we're talking about. So, um, for any women that are listening to this at the moment or listening to this on replay, soon after this, or 2 years later, or 3 years later, whatever, um, what would you say to a woman right now who is struggling with the loss of their child?
Find some sort of community, even if it feels really overwhelming. And if there's not one, use whatever energy you have to create it. Because you're not going to, you're not going to have the energy. You're not going to think you have the energy to create a community of support, but it will benefit you greatly to be able to talk about it with someone. And you don't have to share everything. You don't have to give all the details. You don't have to go into the parts that are too hard to talk about yet. But knowing that you have a community of people that also understand loss in whatever capacity their loss is, in my opinion, and in all the feedback we've gotten from our support group attendees, is that it's a lifesaver. I will say it's been that way for me, and it continues to be, even on the months when I'm like, I don't really think I need support group this month. And then I'll go and I'm like, damn, I really needed that.
Wow.
I needed that connection. So because we think our family and friends are going to support us through our loss, and it's not that they don't, but they might not have the capacity or understanding to support us in the right way.
Exactly.
And we can't blame them for that. You know, at some point you'll go through the anger phase of being like, why the hell couldn't you have supported me better? And blah, blah, you know, that will happen. But if they don't know how to support us, it's not on us to tell them how to support us, because we don't know how we need to be supported. I mean, we're just trying to survive. So survive by surrounding yourself with other women, or, you know, we've had a lot of men come to support group over the years. So, you know, if you find connection with other women or with fathers, whatever you need, find that for yourself.
I totally agree with that, 100%. Any closing thoughts before I close up? This has been great.
I'm just really grateful. I mean, I'm grateful that you allowed me to share, and your questions, and I'm grateful for everyone who has tuned in, whether you're watching now or listening later, you know, whatever. It's so important to me to, every time I share my story and Cohen's story, it is healing for me. And so I'm always grateful to get to do it.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. For those of you watching, thank you so much for joining us here on Her Version. If you have an amazing story to share or struggle to triumph, be sure to reach out to me here or at herversion.life. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I'm so grateful to be here sharing a platform that allows people like Emily to share their truth and inspire others. Have an amazing day. Much love.
Thanks, Sabrina.